After the collapse of the Soviet Union into 15 independent countries, chaos ensued. The 1990s were a dark time in many of these former Soviet republics, marked by rampant poverty, corruption, and crime. People who had once enjoyed some sense of security under the Soviet regime now found themselves in a world without order, often without money, and stripped of property. It was a time of desperation, where the fabric of society seemed to unravel overnight. Citizens who had once sworn allegiance to the Soviet Union were suddenly adrift in a lawless land where no one owed anyone anything. This chaos became a playground for opportunists, and many Soviet officials, once part of the highest echelons of power, saw this as their moment to act. They began selling classified documents, secrets once tightly held by the Kremlin, to the highest bidders, the Americans and the British. In 2004, while cleaning out my grandfather's basement, I stumbled upon something extraordinary: a large dust-covered suitcase, forgotten in a corner. Inside, I found hundreds of documents, photographs, reports, and other materials. It felt like I had opened a portal to another world. What was even more shocking was that 90% of these documents focused on unexplained phenomena that had occurred in the Soviet Union, many of which were directly related to extraterrestrial encounters. When I first laid eyes on the contents, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. There were photographs of unidentified flying objects, UFOs, taken in remote areas of Siberia, some dating back to the 1950s. But what really caught my attention were photos from Soviet expeditions in Antarctica. These expeditions had reportedly discovered tunnels carved deep into glaciers, leading to an underground pyramid. The photos were grainy but unmistakable, showing structures that defied any conventional explanation. And by the way, I have a video about this on my channel, which you can watch. But it wasn't just photos. There were detailed notes about secret transactions between Soviet officials and their American and British counterparts. According to these documents, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, top Soviet officials, desperate for money, sold hundreds of pieces of evidence related to extraterrestrial civilizations to Western governments. These high-ranking officials, including generals and intelligence officers, treated these classified materials like personal treasures. They sold them off piece by piece, everything from photos and reports to engineering blueprints that supposedly came from crashed UFOs. And it wasn't just alien-related material. Entire cargo ships filled with Soviet weapons were sold off as well, most of them ending up in the hands of militias in South America and Africa. For the safety of myself and my family, I cannot reveal my grandfather's identity. What I can tell you is this: in 1992, General Nikolai Yevgenyevich Solovtsov, one of the most powerful men in the Soviet military, sold the Americans the wreckage of a UFO. This UFO had reportedly crashed in the Ural Mountains in 1972, and for decades it had been stored at the 6138th base for communications equipment repair and storage. The Americans, under the guise of a scientific delegation, secretly transported this wreckage from the Ural base to an airfield where it was flown out of Russia to a military base in Poland. And this was just the beginning. Over the following years, the Americans purchased classified materials from Soviet officials on no fewer than 10 separate occasions, buying evidence in Russia, Ukraine, Georgia, and Kazakhstan. Kazakhstan, in particular, held a special treasure. When the Americans began working with Kazakh officials, they acquired skeletons, skeletal remains of beings that had never been documented on Earth. These skeletons were unlike anything ever seen in the fossil record. In 1994, the Americans traveled to Georgia and met with President Eduard Shevardnadze, where they struck a deal to transfer an enormous cache of extraterrestrial artifacts from the Krubera Cave, located in occupied Abkhazia. Despite the war between Russia and Georgia, in 1993, Georgian forces managed to smuggle these extraterrestrial artifacts from the city of Sokhumi to Tbilisi, ensuring their safety amid the chaos of the conflict. When the Americans arrived in Georgia in 1994, they successfully negotiated the acquisition of these artifacts from the Georgian government. Krubera Cave, as you might know, is the deepest cave on the planet, a place of immense mystery. For centuries, local legends had spoken of strange phenomena surrounding the cave. Some believed it had once been used as a base by extraterrestrial beings thousands of years ago. In 1965, a Soviet scientific expedition ventured into Krubera, only to vanish without a trace. No remains were ever recovered, and the incident was buried deep in Soviet archives, classified as top secret. The Americans managed to secure these extraterrestrial artifacts in 1994, and the materials were taken out of Georgia under the radar. These artifacts, ranging from strange metallic devices to what appeared to be pieces of advanced technology, now sit in U.S. government vaults, their purpose still unknown. What experiments have been conducted on them? What breakthroughs have they led to? That's something I cannot say, but the documents I found in my grandfather's suitcase strongly suggest that extraterrestrial civilizations visited our planet far more often than we've been led to believe. In 2007, while in Baku, Azerbaijan, I met a former Soviet physicist who had once been a close friend of my grandfather. He confirmed what I had already suspected, that the Kremlin had tried, unsuccessfully, to reclaim the materials that had been sold to the Americans. They were willing to pay any price to get them back, but the Americans refused outright. What's more, the physicist told me that in the early 2000s, the Russian government planted a spy inside the Pentagon. This spy, Yevgeny Serdyukov, was a U.S. citizen of Russian descent, born in Miami. His mission was to infiltrate the Pentagon and retrieve the secret files that had been bought from Soviet officials. However, Serdyukov was caught before he could accomplish his mission, and in 2004 he was convicted of treason and espionage. The Russians never managed to recover the materials, and they remain in American hands to this day. It's astonishing to think about all the secrets that were exchanged in the shadows during the collapse of the Soviet Union. What was once guarded under lock and key by the Kremlin is now in the possession of foreign governments who, for all we know, are conducting experiments on technologies that could change the world.